One part of being an American citizen is voting on important issues and on who will represent your voice in government. So it's very important to be able to know what qualities make a good leader. Many times we base what makes a good leader off of personality traits like charisma or confidence. But many leaders have these traits, and what distinguishes the good from the bad most is how they make decisions. So to figure out what type of people make the best decisions, it's best to use the past to see what works and what doesn't. One quality that is important to American society is to know if a leader knows when to intervene in the capitalist economy. In our past, we experienced a period called the Great Depression, in which the capitalist economy failed. Starting with the Dust Bowl, revenue in the farming industry fell due to the destruction of crops by dust that swept across the Great Plains. Combined with excessive lending to citizens, the eventual outcome was that companies needed money to make up for lost revenue. The people that owed the money didn't have any to give companies since they borrowed too much, so they had to pull monies from the bank instead, and then just sat on it. Because of this, companies failed, and more people pulled out money from stocks until everything collapsed and the stock market crashed. And since companies had no money, they couldn't employ anyone and had to cut jobs. People during this time were extremely poor compared to today's standards, and as such, they had very different lifestyles. They had to share money as a community in order to buy essential things like sugar and flour. Both the suicide rate and the unemployment rate went up dramatically, and people began to lose hope in everything. What's important about the Great Depression, though, is how different people handled it. During this time, there was two presidents with two different approaches to the problem. The first was Herbert Hoover. He felt that Americans were too proud of people to need the government to intervene or provide relief, so he didn't do much about the Depression and relied on the free market system to fix itself. This didn't work very well. The other was Franklin D. Roosevelt. He felt that it was necessary to intervene in the system, so he instated something called the New Deal. There was a series of institutions and laws passed, like the National Recovery Administration, the Social Security Administration, and the Agricultural Adjustment Act. These institutions did things like set working standards, minimum wage, provided to the poor and the old money, and set prices on farm goods. Using his 3 R's of relief, recovery, and reform, he revived the economy. So history tells us that one good quality of a leader is that they know when to intervene into the economy. And one leader that can be looked at as a good example of this quality is Franklin D. Roosevelt. Another quality of a leader that is good is knowing when to go to war, or better yet, what justifies somebody to go to war. To see this, it is best to understand that the Great Depression was actually a global depression, and many countries were under its influence. So while the United States economy plummeted and the social structure collapsed, so did most of the world's. However, there's one key difference between how America handled things politically. In Europe, many countries were still under the limitations of the Treaty of Versailles. This made it extremely difficult on their economy to try and recover during the Great Depression. So in many states, dictators and fascist regimes came to power promising order at the expense of civil liberties. In this case, there are four men we can look to see how different responses come to different results. The first of these being Adolf Hitler, who was the fascist leader of Germany and leader of the Nazi Party. During the Great Depression, he dug his country out of poverty in 1 year's time. He did this by breaking the treaty and creating war weapons. Then, he decided that Germany deserved to control the entire world and started to conquer Europe. This inevitably led to World War II. But of course, before World War II, he got away with taking over huge chunks of the continent with the help of fascist Italy. This was also due in part to another of the four men, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain. Instead of deciding to go to war to stop this monstrous man, or even deciding to talk to him, he used appeasement to keep him from declaring war on him. So in fact, he let this go on. But this sort of response was very different from the response of another man named Winston Churchill. He had argued from early on that Britain should do something about Germany. Eventually, he was elected Prime Minister of Britain because the Nazis had declared war on them. Because of Winston Churchill, Britain was able to stand its grounds against Nazi invasion and avoid being taken over. Franklin D. Roosevelt is our fourth example, and during this time he was up for re-election. Although he wanted to aid Britain against the Nazis and the Italian fascists, there was very high isolationist tendencies in the United States at the time, so at most all he could do was lend more war materials to the Allied forces. But in an odd enough coincidence, Japan attacked the United States in Pearl Harbor and gave people a reason to go to war. So then the United States was at war with both Germany and Japan. With their combined efforts, along with help from Russia along the Eastern Front, the Allies achieved victory in Europe. And with the strategy of island hopping and powerful new weapon of nuclear bombs, the Japanese were defeated in the Pacific. Because of FDR's decision to go to war, the economy was restored to normal due to production of war materials, and African Americans as well as other minorities began to become more part of the workforce. However, following this victory, Americans became very unaccepting of social differences due to the return of the Red Scare, so many minorities suffered new discrimination. Often people who stepped outside cultural norms were victimized. In Germany, the entire country had to be brought to its knees before rebuilding could be done, and as a result of the war, the country was divided between its eastern and western halves. So from this war, we can look to the actions of FDR and Winston Churchill as good examples of what a leader should do when considering war. But another quality that is good in a leader is being able to see the short and long-term consequences of their actions. This is extremely important in making any major decision and is one of the best qualities to look for in a person. The action of fighting in World War II was in many ways a good thing. It ended the Holocaust and created the United Nations, but it also led to some bad consequences like the regional devastation in Europe, Asia, and Northern Africa. It caused the restoration of the State of Israel, which has caused tremendous regional conflict ever since its creation. This could have been avoided if the United States had taken more time in consideration with what to do with Palestine, and it started the Cold War, which caused persecution of thousands within the US and the USSR, as well as almost drove us into nuclear war. This could have been avoided had the president refrained from using the atomic bomb. But usually foresight is hard to find in leaders, since the only way to know that your predictions are correct is to wait and see, and by that time something could have gone horribly wrong. So our best way to see the future is through our past, and by knowing our past we can find things which led us our forefathers succeed in their time and avoid things that cause them hardship, and be able to choose a leader who will carry us to the future.